For 45 years, the Robinson family built their restaurant empire on dignity and respect. From one soul food kitchen to 76 locations across 12 states, Harold and Evelyn Robinson still visit each new franchise personally, sitting at ordinary tables, observing how their staff treats every customer. But when they arrive at their newest location in Mapleton, they discover something disturbing. A franchise owner named Richard Whitley has implemented his own system. Special codes for certain customers, premium tables for some, corner seats by the kitchen for others. When Harold politely questions the long wait for their food, Whitley's true character emerges. "This is my restaurant," Whitley declares, "and some customers simply aren't aligned with our brand image." What Richard Whitley doesn't realize, the black family he just refused to serve built the very restaurant chain he operates. By morning, the Robinson family launches a systematic investigation that will change not just one restaurant, but an entire industry's approach to discrimination. No confrontation, no revenge, just methodical, evidence-based accountability. What would you do if someone discriminated against you in your own business? Would you seek revenge or systematic change? Comment below with how you would handle this situation, and subscribe to hear more stories about justice served with dignity. Harold Robinson straightened his tie in the mirror of his modest suburban home. At 68, his salt and pepper hair and deep laugh lines spoke of a life well lived, but his eyes still held the sharp focus that had built Robinson family restaurants from a single soul food kitchen to a chain of 76 locations across 12 states. "Evelyn, are you about ready?" he called to his wife of 45 years. Evelyn Robinson emerged from the bedroom, elegant in a simple blue dress. At 66, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that had guided their business decisions for decades. "Just about. Is Marcus meeting us there?" she asked, referencing their son who now handled much of the day-to-day operations as COO. "Yes, and Aisha too. She's flying in from Chicago." Harold smiled at the thought of his daughter who managed their Midwest expansion. The Robinsons had a tradition going back 20 years. Whenever they opened a new franchise location, they would visit unannounced, posing as regular customers. No special treatment, no advance warning, just an honest assessment of the food, service, and atmosphere their customers would experience. "Today's visit is especially important," Harold said, checking his watch. "It's our first location in Mapleton, and I've heard interesting things about the new franchise owner, Richard Whitley." "Interesting?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. She developed a keen sense for her husband's careful word choices over their decades together. "Let's just say Marcus had some concerns during the interview process, but his restaurant management experience was excellent. Revenue projections were too good to pass up." Evelyn nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The Robinsons had built their business by giving people chances, but they never compromised on their core values. As they drove their modest sedan toward Mapleton, Harold reflected on their journey. They'd started with his grandmother's recipes and a small inheritance in a struggling neighborhood of Atlanta. Many had doubted that fancy versions of soul food classics would succeed, but Harold had a vision of creating spaces where their cultural heritage could be celebrated with dignity. The couple had faced countless challenges: banks denying loans, suppliers refusing service, threats when they integrated their staff in the 1980s. Yet they persevered, focusing on excellence rather than anger, documentation rather than confrontation. "I still remember old Mr. Peterson at First National," Evelyn said, as if reading his thoughts. "Told us people like you shouldn't aim so high. Now his grandchildren eat at our restaurants every Sunday after church." Harold chuckled. "And we never did tell him who owned the place." This had become their philosophy: quiet success rather than public recognition. While their company had grown substantial, they'd kept their personal wealth private, stayed out of publicity, and focused on empowering other black entrepreneurs through their franchise program. The Robinsons maintained strict ownership of the company's shares, ensuring decisions always aligned with their values. Their anonymity wasn't just personal preference, it was strategic. Harold believed it allowed them to observe honestly, to understand the true character of those they worked with. As they approached Mapleton, a small but growing city with a diverse population, Harold felt that familiar mix of pride and apprehension. Each new location was like sending a child to college. You'd done your best to prepare them, but ultimately they had to succeed on their own merits. They pulled into the parking lot 15 minutes before the 11:30 lunch rush. The building looked perfect: the familiar warm brick exterior, the signature green awnings, the tasteful logo they'd refined over decades. "Looks good from the outside," Evelyn noted. "Let's see if the inside matches." Marcus's silver Lexus was already in the lot. Harold spotted him sitting on a bench near the entrance, pretending to be engrossed in his phone. At 42, their son had inherited Harold's height and Evelyn's keen observation skills. Next to him sat Aisha, 38, whose business degree from Wharton had transformed their regional chain into a national presence. "Just regular customers today," Harold reminded Evelyn as they approached their children. No special treatment. After all these years, you still think you need to tell me that. Evelyn smiled, squeezing his hand. As the family prepared to enter the restaurant, none of them could have anticipated how this routine quality check would escalate into one of the most challenging situations they'd faced in decades, or how it would ultimately transform not just their company, but an entire community's understanding of dignity, justice, and accountability. As the Robinson family approached the entrance of their newest franchise location, Harold took note of every detail. The landscaping was immaculate, flowering shrubs perfectly trimmed, walkways spotless, and the signature "Welcome to Robinson's" sign gleaming in the midday sun. First impressions are promising, Marcus murmured to his sister as they followed their parents through the glass doors. The interior was designed according to the company's meticulous specifications: warm earth tones on the walls, family photographs from the original Atlanta location tastefully displayed, and the comforting aroma of their signature spice blend wafting from the kitchen. A young hostess greeted them with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Robinson's, table for 4. "Yes, please," Harold replied, deliberately avoiding any hint that they were anything other than first-time customers. The hostess led them to a table in the center of the dining room, prime real estate that gave the Robinsons a perfect vantage point to observe operations. As they settled in, Aisha subtly scanned the restaurant, mentally checking off items from the company's quality assurance list. "Staff uniforms are properly pressed," she whispered. "Tables are clean, spacing is correct." Evelyn nodded approvingly as she opened her menu. "The seasonal specials are properly highlighted." "Good to see they're featuring Grandma's peach cobbler." Their server approached with a warm smile. "Welcome to Robinson's, my name is Tanya and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you folks off with some drinks?" As they ordered, Harold observed Tanya's demeanor, attentive but not overbearing, knowledgeable about the menu, and exhibiting the genuine hospitality that was cornerstone to their brand. "Who's managing today?" Marcus asked casually after Tanya had taken their drink orders. "We're from out of town, but we've heard great things about this place." "Oh, that would be Mr. Whitley," Tanya replied. "He's the owner-operator. Actually, he's right over there." She gestured toward a tall, well-dressed white man in his 50s speaking to a table of businessmen. Richard Whitley carried himself with the confident air of someone accustomed to authority. He laughed loudly with the men, clasping one on the shoulder. "He's been really excited about today," Tanya continued. "Said some VIPs might be stopping by, so he's been making sure everything's perfect." The Robinsons exchanged subtle glances. They had deliberately not announced their visit. "VIPs?" Evelyn asked innocently. "Some bigwigs from corporate, I think," Tanya said. "Mr. Whitley's been having us do extra cleaning all week." As Tanya left to fetch their drinks, Harold leaned in. "Interesting. He's expecting corporate, but not us specifically." "Look at table 7, Aisha said quietly, nodding toward the corner. A black family with 2 young children had just been seated near the kitchen entrance, a less desirable location despite several empty tables in the main dining area. "Could be nothing," Marcus cautioned, "but worth noting." Their conversation paused as Tanya returned with their drinks and took their food orders. Harold deliberately chose items that would test the kitchen's adherence to family recipes: cornbread with honey butter, the signature smothered chicken, and collard greens with smoked turkey. As they waited for their meal, they continued their discreet surveillance. Richard Whitley moved efficiently through the restaurant, greeting customers selectively. Harold noticed that Whitley spent considerably more time at tables with white patrons than others. "Service pattern is inconsistent," Evelyn noted after watching for 15 minutes. "Tables 8 and 12 have been waiting for check-ins. Both tables had non-white customers. Their food arrived presented beautifully on the company's distinctive stoneware." Harold carefully tasted each dish, relieved to find the flavors authentic and execution nearly perfect. Whatever his concerns about Whitley, the kitchen was functioning well. "The chef knows what they're doing," Harold acknowledged. Halfway through their meal, they observed Whitley intercepting their server Tanya as she carried a tray toward a table where a black couple sat with an elderly woman. Whitley took the tray himself, delivered it with a perfunctory greeting, and returned to the front of the restaurant without the customary check in the Robinsons' training manual required. Marcus frowned slightly but said nothing. The most telling moment came when the family seated near the kitchen attempted to order dessert. Their server appeared flustered, whispering something to them before retreating to speak with Whitley. The manager approached their table with a stiff smile. "I'm terribly sorry," they overheard him say, "but we've just run out of peach cobbler. Perhaps another choice." Not 5 minutes later, Whitley personally delivered 2 servings of peach cobbler to the businessmen he'd been chatting with earlier. "That's a clear violation of service standards," Aisha whispered, anger edging her voice. "Documentation, not confrontation," Harold reminded her quietly. "We observe today, we act later." As their meal concluded, the Robinsons requested their check, declining dessert. Tanya seemed disappointed. "Are you sure our peach cobbler is famous?" she encouraged. "Perhaps another time," Evelyn replied kindly. As they prepared to leave, Harold noticed Richard Whitley checking his watch repeatedly, glancing anxiously at the door. He was clearly expecting corporate representatives who would never arrive, at least not in the form he anticipated. "What's your assessment?" Harold asked as they stepped outside. "Food excellent, facility exemplary, service training good," Evelyn summarized. "Management problematic," Marcus nodded grimly. "I counted 6 service disparities based on customer ethnicity in just over an hour. The question is whether this warrants immediate intervention or continued observation," Aisha added. Harold considered carefully. "We'll return for dinner service. Different table, different server. Let's see if the pattern holds before we make any decisions." What none of them realized was that their evening visit would force that decision much sooner, and much more publicly, than any of them had anticipated. The Robinson family returned to their newest franchise location at 7:15 p.m., strategically arriving during the dinner rush when operational systems would be under maximum stress. This time they entered separately, Harold and Evelyn first, followed by Marcus and Aisha 10 minutes later, and requested tables in different sections to observe multiple servers. The restaurant was operating at approximately 85% capacity, with the expected dinner crowd demographic for Mapleton: families, couples, and several business meetings. Richard Whitley was stationed near the host stand, dressed in a crisp suit with the Robinsons logo pin prominently displayed on his lapel. Harold observed Whitley's demeanor shift subtly as he noticed them enter. The franchise owner's eyes lingered on them for 3.2 seconds longer than his scans of other entering customers, not obvious discrimination, but a measurable deviation from standard greeting protocols. "Good evening," the hostess greeted Harold and Evelyn. "Table for 2. "Yes, thank you," Harold replied. "Something near the window would be nice." The hostess glanced at Whitley, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. She led them to a table not by the window but adjacent to the kitchen doors where server traffic was heaviest. "I apologize, but our window tables are reserved," she explained, though Harold had clearly observed 3 empty window tables with no reservation cards. "This will be fine," Evelyn said with practiced calm, making a mental note of the violation of the company's first available seating policy. At 7:25 p.m., Marcus and Aisha entered and were similarly directed to a suboptimal table despite multiple premium locations being available. They were seated in Section 3, while Harold and Evelyn were in Section 5, providing comprehensive observational coverage. The systematic pattern of discrimination became increasingly evident as the meal progressed. 1. Initial service delay. Harold and Evelyn waited 8 minutes for initial server contact versus the company's standard of 2 minutes. 2. Water refill frequency. Their glasses remained empty for 12+ minutes while adjacent tables received prompt refills. 3. Menu recommendations. Their server offered no specials information until specifically requested. 4. Food delivery timing. Their appetizers arrived 4 minutes after tables that had ordered later. Evelyn documented each discrepancy discreetly using the Notes app on her phone, maintaining an objective record without emotional commentary. At 8:03 p.m., the situation escalated significantly. A white couple seated after the Robinsons received their entrees before Harold and Evelyn. When Harold politely inquired about their order, their server appeared flustered. "I'll check on that right away, sir," she promised, hurrying to the kitchen. Richard Whitley intercepted her and a brief, tense conversation ensued. Whitley then approached their table with a manufactured smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone carrying a subtle edge that violated the company's customer service protocols. "We ordered quite some time ago," Harold explained calmly. "We noticed others who arrived after us have been served." Whitley's posture stiffened. "Well, certain dishes take longer to prepare properly. Perhaps next time you might want to order something simpler." The implication hung in the air, an unmistakable microaggression suggesting they weren't sophisticated enough to appreciate the menu. "I've been enjoying Robinson's smothered chicken for many years," Harold replied evenly. "I understand precisely how long it should take to prepare." Whitley's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I've been in the restaurant business for 20 years. I think I know better than you how long our signature dishes take to prepare." "Is that so?" Evelyn interjected, her voice measured but firm. "Yes, ma'am, it is," Whitley responded, his tone now decidedly condescending. "Now I'm happy to check on your order, but I'd appreciate if you wouldn't disrupt the dining experience of our other guests." Harold and Evelyn had not raised their voices. The only disruption was Whitley's increasingly hostile demeanor. From across the restaurant, Marcus and Aisha observed the interaction with growing concern. They had experienced similar treatment, substandard service, delayed attention, and subtle dismissiveness, but Whitley's direct confrontation with their parents represented a clear escalation. At 8:17 p.m., the situation reached critical mass. A server delivered a tray to the table beside Harold and Evelyn's, and as she turned, she bumped Harold's chair. His water glass tipped, spilling onto his lap. "I'm so sorry, sir," the server exclaimed, genuinely mortified. Before she could offer napkins, Richard Whitley materialized. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Just an accident," Harold said, using his napkin to blot the water. Whitley turned to the server. "Lisa, take your break now." He faced Harold and Evelyn with thinly disguised impatience. "Sir, clearly you're situated too close to the serving path. I'm going to have to ask you to move to another table." "I don't think that's necessary," Harold replied. "It was a minor spill." Whitley's professional veneer cracked. "Look, I don't want to make a scene, but this is my restaurant and I decide where customers sit." "Your restaurant?" Evelyn echoed, exchanging a glance with Harold. "Yes, my restaurant," Whitley emphasized, voice rising. "And frankly, I think you'd be more comfortable dining elsewhere. Robinson's aims to provide a certain atmosphere and some customers simply aren't aligned with our brand image." The statement constituted a direct violation of Company Policy 532, non-discrimination in customer service. Harold stood slowly, maintaining his dignity. "So you're refusing service based on what criteria exactly?" Whitley faltered momentarily before regaining his composure. "Don't put words in my mouth. I'm simply suggesting that perhaps Robinson's isn't the right fit for you." By this point, Marcus and Aisha had approached, having witnessed the escalation. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "This doesn't concern you," Whitley snapped, clearly failing to recognize the family connection. "I'm handling a customer situation." "Actually," Aisha interjected, "I believe it does concern us." Whitley's patience visibly evaporated. "Look, I don't know who you people think you are, but I've got a restaurant to run. Either move to the table I'm offering or I'll have to ask you to leave." The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter as other diners observed the confrontation. Several had phones partially raised, documentation that would later prove significant. Harold straightened his tie and looked Whitley directly in the eyes. "Mr. Whitley, I believe we've seen enough of your management style for one evening." With perfect composure, the Robinson family gathered their belongings and moved toward the exit, followed by Whitley's barely concealed look of triumph. What Richard Whitley failed to notice was Harold discreetly collecting a business card from the host stand on their way out. A card bearing the Robinson family restaurant's logo and corporate contact information that would soon become remarkably relevant to the franchise owner's future. The Robinson family gathered in the parking lot of their franchise location, maintaining a deliberately professional composure despite the escalating situation. Harold's expression remained neutral, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his inner state. "Documentation protocol," he stated calmly, initiating their established incident response procedure. Each family member activated voice recording applications on their phones, creating redundant documentation of their recollections. This practice, implemented after a discrimination incident at their third location in 1998, had proven invaluable in previous situations. "Timestamp 8:24 p.m., Evelyn began. Location, Robinson's Family Restaurant, Mapleton Franchise. Franchise operator, Richard Whitley. Incident classification, Category 3 discrimination with verbal escalation and service refusal." Marcus continued, "Observed multiple violations of Company Policies 312, 467, and 532 regarding equitable service standards. Primary evidence includes seating disparities, service timing differentials, and direct discriminatory statements." Aisha added, "Documented 6 instances of preferential treatment based on customer demographics. Witnessed direct confrontation initiated by franchise operator Whitley, culminating in explicit service refusal." Harold concluded, "Initial assessment indicates systematic rather than isolated behavior pattern. Franchise operator Whitley demonstrated conscious implementation of discriminatory practices affecting multiple customers beyond our family unit." Their methodical documentation complete, Harold switched off his recording app and addressed his family directly. "This surpasses our standard threshold for intervention," he stated. Evelyn nodded in agreement. "Immediate action is warranted. This represents a critical brand integrity violation under Section 7 of our franchise agreement." "We have 2 implementation options," Marcus suggested. "Standard protocol would be to initiate a 24-hour formal review followed by intervention. Accelerated protocol allows for immediate disclosure and action where clear violations have occurred." Harold considered carefully. The question isn't whether to act, but how to maximize both accountability and educational impact. Aisha retrieved her tablet from the car and accessed the company's secure database. Whitley's file shows 3 customer complaints filed through corporate channels in the past month, all from minority customers, all dismissed by Whitley as misunderstandings. Those complaints didn't reach executive review, Marcus noted with a frown. They will now, Harold assured him. Evelyn touched her husband's arm. Harold, there's something else to consider. This isn't just about Richard Whitley. The staff are witnessing and implementing his approach. You're right, Harold acknowledged. Lisa, the server who spilled the water, showed genuine distress at Whitley's behavior. There are likely others uncomfortable with his management style. We need to document broader patterns beyond our personal experience, Aisha concluded. Harold nodded decisively. Here's our action plan. First, we'll conduct comprehensive interviews with staff beginning tomorrow morning. Second, we'll review security footage from the past week to establish patterns. Third, we'll examine all customer feedback, not just complaints that reached corporate. And Whitley, Marcus asked, we observe tonight, we document, we don't confront yet, Harold declared. This isn't about personal vindication, it's about systematic correction. As they finalized their strategy, a young woman approached hesitantly from the restaurant's side entrance. They recognized her as Tanya, their server from lunch. Excuse me, she said, her voice low. I saw what happened in there. It wasn't right. We appreciate your concern, Evelyn responded carefully, mindful that Tanya believed them to be ordinary customers. This isn't the first time, Tanya continued. Mr. Whitley has a system, he calls it customer flow optimization, but it's really about keeping certain people less visible than others. How long has this been happening? Harold asked. Since we opened 6 weeks ago. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but she hesitated. But it became a pattern, Aisha finished for her. Tanya nodded. He has codes he uses with the host staff. Table C means put them in the corner or by the kitchen. Special service means minimize interaction. Do you have documentation of this? Marcus inquired. Actually, yes, Tanya said, surprising them. I started keeping notes after the second week. Times, dates, specific instructions, and I'm not the only one. Several of us have been documenting it. What? Harold asked, genuinely curious. Because this isn't what Robinson stands for, Tanya replied with unexpected passion. I researched this company before applying. The Robinson family built this business on principles of dignity and equality. What's happening here dishonors that legacy. The family exchanged subtle glances, moved by Tanya's words. Would you be willing to share your documentation? Evelyn asked gently. That's why I came out here, Tanya confirmed. Several of us are meeting after closing tonight. We've been trying to figure out how to report this to corporate without losing our jobs. Mr. Whitley has made it clear he has connections at headquarters that protect him. Harold's expression remained neutral, though his family could read his internal resolve strengthening. Would 11:30 p.m. at the Mapleton Inn work for your group? He asked. Tanya looked surprised. Yes, but who are you people? Evelyn smiled reassuringly. Just customers who believe in accountability. We may be able to help ensure your concerns reach the appropriate channels. After exchanging contact information, Tanya returned to the restaurant while the Robinsons implemented the next phase of their response protocol. I'll contact legal, Marcus stated, already dialing. I'll prepare the contract review, Aisha added. Harold turned to Evelyn. This is bigger than one franchise owner. It always is, she replied. Discrimination is never isolated, it's systemic. That's why our response must be equally systemic. As they departed, Harold gazed back at the restaurant bearing his family name. The principles that had guided them for decades remained constant. Document, don't confront, focus on systems, not individuals, pursue justice, not revenge. By morning, Richard Whitley would discover exactly whose name was on his franchise agreement and the true cost of betraying the legacy that name represented. Richard Whitley paced the length of his office, his reflection bouncing off the darkened windows of Robinson's Mapleton location. The digital clock on his desk read 11:42 p.m. and the restaurant had been closed for over an hour. Tonight's incident continued to replay in his mind, but not with the concern it warranted, rather with indignation. Entitled customers, he muttered, loosening his tie. Coming in here, acting like they own the place. The irony of his statement would become apparent all too soon. His computer chimed with an incoming email notification. The subject line caused him to freeze mid-stride. Subject, urgent franchise compliance review action required. The sender, Harold Robinson at Robinson Restaurants, com. Whitley's face drained of color as he scrambled to open the message. Mr. Whitley. This email serves as formal notification of an immediate comprehensive compliance review of Franchise 76, Mapleton, following multiple documented violations of the Robinson Family Restaurants Franchise Agreement, specifically sections 431, Adherence to Service Standards, 527, Non-discriminatory customer interactions, 713, Brand integrity maintenance. Per Section 12.4 of your signed agreement, corporate representatives will arrive at 7 a.m. tomorrow to initiate the review process. Please ensure all staff are notified of mandatory interviews. As a precautionary measure, all financial systems will be placed under temporary corporate oversight during the investigation. Harold Robinson, Chief Executive Officer, Robinson Family Restaurants. Impossible, Whitley whispered, the reality of the situation beginning to crystallize. Those people today, they couldn't have been. His phone rang, displaying his assistant manager's number. Derek, I can't talk right now. Sir, you need to turn on Channel 8 News, Derek interrupted, his voice strained. Whitley fumbled for the remote control, turning on the small television mounted in the corner of his office. The evening news was running a segment titled Discrimination Allegations at Popular Restaurant Chain. The reporter's voice cut through his shock. Where 4 members of the Robinson family, founders and owners of the national restaurant chain, were allegedly subjected to discriminatory treatment by a franchise owner who failed to recognize them. Smartphone footage captured by other diners showed portions of the earlier confrontation, including Whitley's statement about MY Restaurant and his suggestion that the Robinsons would be more comfortable dining elsewhere. Whitley sank into his chair, the magnitude of his error crashing down upon him. He quickly accessed the company's internal directory on his computer, searching for Harold Robinson. The executive profile appeared on screen, featuring a professional photograph of the same dignified man he had confronted hours earlier. This can't be happening, he muttered. His phone chimed again with another email. Copy. Subject: Staff Meeting 6:30 a.m. Mandatory attendance. This one from Marcus Robinson, Chief Operations Officer. The methodical, systematic way the Robinsons were responding struck Whitley as both terrifying and infuriating. There were no emotional accusations, no threats, simply the calm implementation of contractual processes. His immediate instinct was self-preservation. He began frantically accessing the restaurant's digital records, searching for anything that might contradict the accusations or support his customer flow optimization practices as legitimate business strategy. As he attempted to modify recent seating arrangements in the digital host system, a notification appeared. System notice: all records have been archived and protected as part of Compliance Review CR 7603. Modification attempts have been logged. See Franchise Agreement Section 821 regarding records tampering. Whitley slammed his fist on the desk. They had already locked down the systems. His next thought was damage control. He pulled out his phone and began texting select staff members. Need to meet ASAP. Corporate visit tomorrow. Important we present unified message about service protocols. Bonus for those who support company practices. My office in 30 min. He didn't realize that among the recipients was Tanya, who at that moment was sitting with Lisa, Derek, and 3 other staff members in a meeting room at the Mapleton Inn directly across from the Robinson family. At the inn, Tanya showed Harold the message she had just received. This confirms attempt to manipulate testimony, Harold noted calmly, as Marcus documented the text in their evidence file. Direct violation of Section 1132. Evelyn addressed the gathered staff with genuine appreciation. Thank you all for your courage in coming forward. I want to assure you that Robinsons has a strict non-retaliation policy. Your jobs are protected. We had no idea who you were, Lisa said, still processing the situation. Mr. Whitley always told us that the Robinsons were just figureheads, that they weren't involved in day-to-day operations. A common misconception we sometimes leverage for quality control, Harold acknowledged. But make no mistake, we are deeply involved in upholding our company's values. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Whitley was growing desperate. Only 2 staff members had responded to his text, neither willing to meet at such a late hour. He began reviewing the franchise agreement, searching for loopholes. His attention focused on Section 15.4, franchise transfer rights. Perhaps he could sell the franchise before the compliance review completed. He made a call to James Harrington, a business associate who had previously expressed interest in purchasing a Robinsons franchise. James, it's Richard. I know it's late, but I have an urgent business opportunity. How quickly could you put together an offer for my Robinsons franchise? The uncomfortable silence on the other end stretched before James responded. Richard, I just got off the phone with Marcus Robinson. The entire restaurant community knows what happened. No one's going to touch your franchise. The systematic isolation was closing in. Whitley's attempts at documentation manipulation had been blocked. His effort to coach staff testimony was exposed. His escape route through franchise transfer was closed. At 1:23 a.m., his final attempt at damage control took the form of an email drafted to Harold Robinson. Mr. Robinson, there appears to have been a misunderstanding regarding today's service issues. Our restaurant was experiencing unusual staffing challenges, resulting in service that did not meet our usual standards. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss this matter personally rather than proceeding with a formal review. I'm certain we can resolve any concerns without disrupting restaurant operations. Regards. Richard Whitley. The response came just 4 minutes later. Mr. Whitley, your concerns about operational disruption are noted. However, the documented pattern of discriminatory behavior necessitates a formal review process. The review team's goal is fact-finding, not punitive action. I encourage you to approach tomorrow's process with transparency. Section 16.2 of your franchise agreement outlines the compliance review procedures. Please familiarize yourself with these before our 7:00 a.m. meeting. Harold Robinson. The methodical, process-oriented nature of the response left no room for negotiation or manipulation. The Robinsons were not acting out of emotion or seeking revenge. They were systematically implementing accountability protocols designed precisely for situations like this. As Whitley finally left the restaurant at 2:17 a.m., he noticed a courier delivering an envelope to the door. Inside was a formal compliance review notification, officially documenting what he already knew. By 7 a.m., his actions would face comprehensive scrutiny from the family whose legacy he had disrespected, and whose name hung above the door he was locking for what would likely be the last time. At precisely 7 a.m., the systematic implementation of Robinson's franchise compliance protocol commenced. The corporate response team arrived in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Legal counsel first, followed by HR representatives, then the technical systems audit team, and finally the Robinson family. Harold entered last, his presence immediately recalibrating the atmosphere in the restaurant. Staff members who had never met the founder recognized him instantly from the company orientation materials. Richard Whitley stood near the host station, sleep-deprived and visibly tense. "Mr. Whitley," Harold acknowledged with professional courtesy, "let's proceed to the conference room." The compliance review followed a structured, multi-phase approach. Phase 1 Documentation Collection 7:05 to 8:30 a.m. Systems specialists secured and archived 142 hours of security footage from the previous 14 days. Complete digital records from point-of-sale systems. 6 weeks of staff scheduling and section assignment data. Customer feedback from both official and third-party channels. Email and internal communication records. Phase 2 Staff interviews 8:30 to 11:45 a.m. The interview process followed standard protocol. Individual sessions with all 27 staff members. Standardized question matrix covering service procedures. Documentation of witnessed incidents. Review of Whitley's management directives. Tanya's testimony proved particularly significant. Mr. Whitley implemented what he called customer category codes during our second week of operation. He instructed hosts to assign codes A through D based on, quote, customer quality and spending potential. In practice, code assignments correlated directly with customer ethnicity. Lisa, the server from the previous evening's incident, provided corroborating evidence. We were instructed to prioritize service for A and B tables. When I questioned why certain customers consistently received C and D designations, Mr. Whitley said some demographics just don't fit the Robinsons' image he was trying to cultivate. Phase 3 Data Analysis 11:45 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. The technical team conducted quantitative analysis of operational patterns. Average wait times segregated by customer demographics. Table assignment distributions. Service timing differentials. Staff section assignments. The results demonstrated statistically significant disparities. 83% of minority customers assigned to non-premium sections. Average service wait times 12.4 minutes longer for non-white customers. 97% of preferred customer designations assigned to white patrons. Phase 4 Franchise Owner Deposition, 1:30 to 3:15 p.m. Marcus and Harold conducted Whitley's interview personally, maintaining strictly professional demeanor throughout. Their questioning followed a methodical structure designed to establish patterns rather than isolated incidents. "Mr. Whitley," Marcus began, "our analysis indicates systematic service disparities based on customer demographics. Could you explain the customer classification system implemented on May 12th? Whitley's initial strategy was denial. "We don't have any classification system. All customers receive equal treatment. Harold slid a document across the table, a printout of Whitley's staff training materials with explicit customer categorization guidelines. This document instructs hosts to, quote, optimize customer placement for maximum ambience impact. Could you clarify what metrics determine optimal placement? Whitley's strategy shifted to justification. This is standard industry practice. Certain customers create a more appealing atmosphere for other diners. And what specific characteristics determine a customer's atmosphere impact? Marcus inquired. Appearance, behavior, spending potential, Whitley responded, growing defensive. Every restaurant does this. You can't build an upscale brand without curating your clientele. Yet the Robinsons franchise agreement explicitly prohibits such practices, Harold noted, referencing Section 532. Was this section unclear during your onboarding? Look, Whitley said, abandoning pretense, I was trying to elevate your brand in this market. The demographics here required some adjustments to your standard protocols. Adjustments that directly contradicted our core values, Evelyn stated, speaking for the first time. With all due respect, Mrs. Robinson, Whitley countered, your company succeeded because previous franchise owners understood when to be flexible about certain idealistic policies. The implication that racial discrimination had contributed to the company's success created a momentary silence. Harold maintained perfect composure, though his family recognized the subtle tension in his posture. Mr. Whitley, Harold responded evenly, our company succeeded precisely because we never compromised on dignity and equality. Those aren't idealistic policies, they're foundational principles. Phase 5, Resolution Implementation 3:15 to 5 p.m. Following the established protocol for Category 1 violations, the most severe classification in their compliance system, the Robinson family convened to determine appropriate actions. Their decision-making focused on systemic remediation rather than punitive measures. At 5 p.m., staff members gathered in the dining room. Harold addressed them directly. Effective immediately, this location will enter a 30-day remediation period. During this time, 1. Richard Whitley's franchise agreement is suspended pending termination review. 2. Corporate management will temporarily oversee operations. 3. All staff will receive supplemental training on equitable service practices. 4. Customer feedback systems will be enhanced with additional metrics. 5. All staff positions are secured during this transition. 6. A new franchise operator will be selected through our standard vetting process. He turned to address Whitley specifically. Mr. Whitley, Section 18.3 of your franchise agreement provides for contract termination in cases of documented discrimination. Our legal team will contact you tomorrow regarding separation procedures and financial reconciliation. Whitley attempted one final defense. You can't prove intent. This was about business optimization, not discrimination. Intent is irrelevant to outcome, Aisha responded. Our concern is impact, not motivation. Furthermore, Marcus added, your text messages to staff last night attempting to coordinate testimony constitute contractual interference under Section 1132, which independently warrants termination. The systematic, evidence-based approach left no room for emotional escalation or counterarguments. The Robinson family had implemented accountability through process rather than confrontation, exactly as they had built their business over decades. As the meeting concluded, Harold addressed the staff once more. For 45 years, Robinson's has represented not just quality food, but dignity for all who enter our doors. That legacy continues through each of you. We look forward to working directly with you during this transition period. The compliance review had achieved its primary objectives. Documented systematic discrimination. Preserved staff employment. Protected brand integrity. Initiated structural remediation. Established clear consequences for policy violations. What Richard Whitley had failed to understand, beyond whose name was on the building, was that the Robinson family's approach to justice mirrored their approach to business, methodical, evidence-based, and focused on systems rather than individuals. Their response wasn't about punishing one franchise owner, but about protecting the dignity-centered principles that had guided their company from a single soul food kitchen to a national brand. 6 months after the compliance review at Robinson's Mapleton location, the systematic implementation of corrective measures had transformed both the restaurant and its surrounding community. The impact extended far beyond a single franchise location, creating ripple effects throughout the Robinsons' corporate structure and the broader restaurant industry. Operational transformation. The Mapleton location underwent comprehensive restructuring. 1. Leadership transition. Following Whitley's removal, Tanya Henderson was promoted to assistant manager, working under Regional Director Marcus Robinson during the initial 90-day transition period. 2. Staff development. All 27 staff members received enhanced training on equitable service practices, with 100% retention rate during the transition. 3. System redesign. The point-of-sale and seating management systems were reconfigured to eliminate potential vectors for discrimination, implementing randomized table assignment protocols with manager oversight. 4. Performance metrics. New KPIs were established prioritizing service consistency across all customer demographics, with weekly audits and statistical variance analysis. 5. Community engagement. Monthly, community table events were instituted, bringing together diverse local residents for facilitated conversations over meals provided by the restaurant. Corporate evolution. The Mapleton incident catalyzed significant changes within Robinson's corporate structure. 1. Enhanced oversight framework. The company implemented a 3-tier monitoring system for all 76 locations, including quarterly anonymous compliance audits, real-time service equity analytics, staff reporting channels that bypassed local management. 2. Franchise agreement revision. Section 5 of the Standard Franchise Agreement was expanded to include explicit anti-discrimination language with defined metrics and automated monitoring requirements. 3. Training overhaul. All franchise operators underwent mandatory recertification in the company's equity principles, with continuing education requirements added to contract renewal terms. 4. Transparency initiative. Robinsons published quarterly compliance data for all locations, creating accountability through public transparency. The most significant corporate change was the creation of the Robinson Community Advisory Board. Harold invited prominent civil rights leaders, restaurant industry experts, and community advocates to provide independent oversight of the company's practices. Their quarterly reports were made public, establishing unprecedented transparency in the industry. Industry influence. By addressing discrimination through systematic action rather than performative statements, the Robinson family established a new standard for corporate accountability. 1. Industry adoption. 3 competing restaurant chains implemented similar franchise monitoring systems within 8 months. 2. Economic impact study. The Harvard Business Review published an analysis demonstrating 17% revenue growth at locations implementing Robinson's equity protocols compared to industry averages. 3. Legislative consultation. Harold Robinson testified before a state legislative committee developing anti-discrimination guidelines for service industries. Personal resolutions. The story's resolution manifested differently for each key participant. Richard Whitley faced significant consequences for his actions. Beyond losing his franchise, his discriminatory practices became the subject of a discrimination lawsuit filed by customers who had documented similar experiences. Ultimately, he left the restaurant industry entirely, later acknowledging in a trade publication interview that the incident had forced him to confront long-held biases he had previously rationalized as business decisions. Tanya Henderson's courage in documenting the discrimination led to her promotion and eventually to a management position. Under her leadership, the Mapleton location became the top-performing franchise in customer satisfaction across all demographics. The Robinson family continued their decades-long commitment to dignity and equality through systematic, process-oriented approaches rather than symbolic gestures. They declined numerous media interview requests about the incident, maintaining their characteristic focus on action over publicity. Meaningful change. 6 months after the incident, Harold and Evelyn returned to the Mapleton location unannounced. They were seated promptly at a center table by a host who didn't recognize them. Their server provided attentive, equitable service identical to what they observed at neighboring tables with diverse customers. After their meal, they requested to speak with management. Tanya emerged from the office, immediately recognizing them. "Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, I had no idea you were visiting today." "That's exactly how we prefer it," Harold smiled. "The true measure of success isn't how people behave when they know they're being watched." He gestured around the dining room where customers of various backgrounds enjoyed their meals with equal service attention. "This is what we envisioned 45 years ago," Evelyn remarked. "Not just serving food, but creating spaces where dignity is universal." Tanya nodded. "We've implemented all the new protocols, but honestly, they've become second nature now. The staff doesn't think of them as special procedures, just as the right way to operate." "That's the definition of systemic change," Harold noted approvingly, "when equity becomes operational rather than aspirational." As they prepared to leave, a delivery truck arrived with supplies. Harold paused to watch the driver interact with the kitchen staff, the seamless, respectful coordination that represented the culmination of decades building not just a restaurant chain, but a culture of dignity. You know, he told Evelyn as they walked to their car, when we opened our first location, people said we were idealists who didn't understand business realities. Evelyn smiled, taking his hand. And now business schools teach the Robinson model as the reality others should aspire to. Their legacy wasn't merely in the 76 restaurants bearing their name, but in demonstrating that principles and profits could coexist. That dignity wasn't an idealistic luxury, but a systematic operational approach that enhanced rather than hindered business success. As their car pulled away from the restaurant where systematic discrimination had once occurred, the Robinson family had accomplished something far more meaningful than punishing one franchise owner. They had transformed a moment of injustice into a mechanism for lasting change, proving once again that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't revenge but reform, not confrontation but construction of better systems. The sign above the door still read Robinsons, but now the name represented not just a family legacy, but a community standard.